Hi, everyone. John Chernesky here. Sorry, we're a couple minutes late. I had to get my hair right. It took an extra minute, extra hour, actually. So thanks for joining in. Again, I'm sorry I'm a couple minutes late. Would love to hear where you're all from as we're loading this all in. It takes a second or two to get everybody in there. I do want to give a shout out to Linda from Albuquerque. Linda joined about 6 hours early. What's that? It was only 20 minutes. Okay, it felt like 6 hours early. And Tammy, we got you from Renton, Washington, Expedia Cruises. Hi, everybody, Expedia Cruises. Hi, Tammy. Good to have you with us. You'll notice the puppet behind me. He's a little down today. Big night last night. Suzanne from Myrtle Beach, welcome. Hope all is well. Hope the weather's good there. No humidity there, I understand. Mickey from beautiful, very warm Surrey, BC, Canada. Welcome, Mickey. Rita from Sagamore Hills, Ohio. OH. I think you know what to do after that. Geraldine from Montgomery, Alabama. Welcome, Geraldine. Good to have you with us. Michael from Thorhill, Ontario. I'm pretty sure that is in Canada, ladies and gentlemen. Michael from Ontario, just across the border from Michigan, perhaps. Maybe I'm guessing wrong. Maybe it's a different part of Ontario. Lee from Bay City, Texas. Hello, Lee. I like your little avatar picture there. And you're joining in from YouTube. Now, granted, we have Facebook and YouTube followers here, which is really cool. Eliza from San Francisco Bay Area, East Bay. I've got some family in-laws are in East Bay, so I like to stay away from the East Bay. Just kidding. Renee from Apache Junction, Arizona. I bet that is beautiful. Good to have you, Renee. Thank you so much for joining in. And then last but not least, Rich from hot and steamy Chicago. Chicago's hot and steamy even in the winter, Rich. I think you and I can agree that. That is a fun city. There's a lot going on there. Love it. Okay. So with that, thanks everybody for joining in. We, as always, like to ensure that if you need a little help and want to have the transcript going on Facebook, you can turn those captions on the bottom, and everything we're saying will be captioned. But we really appreciate your time in joining us today. Stick around. We've got Q&A that was pre-submitted as part of the registration coming in. We'll throw in those questions at the end. If you want to ask questions as we're going, go for it. I just will say it's unlikely we'll be able to get to all of them, but we'll do our very best. And I think what we're going to go through most of this presentation today is Q&A. We're going to walk you through it. And assuming we had a little technical difficulty, assuming the feed works, thankfully, you're not going to have to hear from me the whole time. But maybe, let's see what happens, see if my special guest is able to join us. But before we get to her, I just want to say, here's who I am. You know me hopefully by now, and you've seen some pictures from my trip to Alaska. We had a wonderful time, but also some other pictures from my family travels over the years, from everywhere from Japan to the Caribbean, you name it. And that bottom right photo, I was a little excited in that picture. But man, that was we had just set sail, and I was like, yes, we're back at sea. Wow, finally. Again, we are back at sea, and we are very, very excited. And what's even more exciting is that we just announced today, for those that are interested, we have you've been asking for a while, our Princess Academy. I just want to make a mention, hot off the press, the second refresher course is now available. It's focused on Medallion Class and Dine My Way. That is all there, so you can take a look there and get your second class. And then we're extending the deadline. The third class is going to come out hopefully by the end of this month, third refresher course, I should say. I'm sorry, early September. I should read my own slide. And that will give some guidance on, or once you do that, then you're clear. So get those three done, and that has to be done by October 14th. So we're giving you a couple of weeks to do that. It shouldn't take too long. And then you maintain your active Commodore status. So that is all that you need to do. Now, as you know, Princess has returned to the high seas for Alaska, but we also have some other places coming up. California coast, we got Caribbean, Mexico, Panama Canal, Hawaii, my birthplace, is coming right around the corner. We are very, very excited for all of that to happen. Can't happen soon enough. I forgot I have more pictures, because you haven't seen enough pictures of me in my travels. Lumberjack shows, rafting through eagle sanctuaries, zip lining, alpine mountaineering on Mendenhall Glacier, and seeing a raptor center. They have a little area there for that recovered eagle that's being taken care of behind us. To stand that close to an eagle was one of the highlights of the trip, to say the very least. And we weren't even expecting it, so that was super cool. But we're here to talk health and safety, and we want to go through in some detail, because we made some updates in terms of the pre-testing requirements for voyages through basically the end of October, and we're going to dive into those. And thankfully, you don't have to listen to me because last I checked, did I go to medical school? I did not. No, I did not go to medical school. I'm just checking with the producer off camera. Thankfully, this lady did. Dr. Brenda Barneson. Brenda, join us. Thank you so much for joining us, I should say. Welcome. Uh-oh. Are you there?
Thank you, John.
So good. Now, Dr. Barneson, thank you, first of all. I know you're very, very busy, as always, especially these days, but maybe introduce yourself to the folks at home, a little bit about your background, please.
Thank you. Just checking if you can hear me clearly.
I can. You sound great.
Great. So good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. Yes, so I am from South Africa, but I now live in Los Angeles with my husband, Pete. That picture was taken on one of our ships, Queen Mary, in fact, when we were on an ocean crossing. So I come to you from my home now in Santa Clarita, where I live, and pleased to have the opportunity today to speak with everyone and hopefully shed some light or bring clarity to the questions that you submitted. So we can get started, John.
Great. Now, I just want to confirm, you did go to medical school, because I didn't, and you used to work on the ships in the capacity as a medical professional. True or false?
Correct. Yeah. So I'm an emergency physician by training, and I worked at sea for many, many years as a ship's doctor, and then later also as a ship's senior doctor. Sailed on almost 20 vessels, went around the world a couple of times. My favorite places, without a doubt, had to be Costa Rica and Greece. Very, very fond of Alaska, of course. It's nothing like South Africa, where we don't have any snow. So I'm excited to be speaking with this group about, the cruises in Alaska that are starting this summer.
Very good. All right. Well, thank you, Dr. Barneson, for being with us. We really appreciate it. Now, let's dive in. We're going to talk about different things from vaccinations to pre-testing. And I think we have been pretty clear on vaccination requirements, but we figured it couldn't hurt to just remind everybody that the sailings that we have right now, basically through the end of this year, right? So everything I just showed you on that one slide about Alaska, California coast, Hawaii, Caribbean, Panama Canal, all of those require vaccination for not only the guests, but also the crew per CDC guidance, right? And you must have the final dose of an approved vaccine at least 14 days prior to the start of your cruise.
That is correct, John. I couldn't have said that any better than you just did.
Are you sure I didn't go to medical school? I'm just checking with the producer over here. No, I did not. Okay, I watched a lot of ER back in the day, so maybe that's why. And of course, all the guests and crew are following enhanced protocols. We've always had very rigorous health and safety protocols, but now it's even more rigorous, I guess you could say. Yeah. Okay, so that's pretty clear. And then the question is, well, what's the acceptable proof of the vaccination to board the ship?
Okay, so John, and you can display the answer to this question, so we don't need to keep people wondering. But basically in the United States, the only proof that anyone that's received a vaccine today can get is a vaccine card or a digital copy of a vaccine card. So as a travel agent, or I'm not quite sure if all the callers are agents, but I would definitely encourage guests booking cruises with us to go and look for their cards and put them in their purse or wallet and travel with the original card. That's the best evidence available to prove that you've been vaccinated. Now, if you've lost your card, or if you think there's information missing on your card, I would encourage your guests to log into their state's vaccine website, where this information is usually hosted, and that differs by state. But many states do make this information available to individuals that were vaccinated in that state. And that usually results in either a text message or an email or a link that takes you to a website that then displays the guest's name and the details of the vaccine that they received in a way that we accept. So we're okay with the guest actually taking out their phone and showing us on their phone that digital record. If they got a printout of that exact same record and bring that along, that's also fine. Sometimes the printouts have a QR code on that if we had to scan that, it would take us to the website where we can see that information. So that's also acceptable. But I would really encourage people to have that information on hand, because cards get stolen, everybody puts them in a special place, and then of course nobody can remember exactly where the special place is. It's happened to me. For a while I couldn't find my card, and then I went through the process myself of finding out how to prove that I've been vaccinated, having been vaccinated in California. And I also found out that my own healthcare insurance provider got a copy of my vaccine record. So even if I logged into my own personal health record, I can pull a health record copy of my vaccine. So those are the acceptable forms of proof that we accept, John.
That's great. Now, I for my recent travels, I'll tell you what I did. I actually put the vaccine card in my passport, because I figured I need my passport. Like, I always travel with my passport when I go on a cruise. And then I also had the QR code as a backup. So I thought that was kind of the good way to do it. Now, Christoph is asking, what about the proof from a foreign country, such as Canada? Because I know there's things a little different in Canada, right?
Correct, yes. So vaccine cards just simply look different if they come from Canada or other countries. The same information, and we'll go through that, is usually on the card, and all the same rules apply to vaccines that were administered in other countries, as long as the vaccine is a vaccine that is accepted by the US CDC for a guest sailing on a cruise ship within the US.
Right. Now, we're showing the slide here just to give further clarity to the answer in terms of what information is usually going to be part of a vaccine record anyway. This is pretty standard information on the record, correct?
Yeah, so let's just go through that. So we want to see the guest's ID, and that is a government-issued ID. And what we'll literally do is hold up the ID in one hand and hold up their vaccine evidence in the other hand and compare. We want to see that they have the first and same last name, and that there's one other identifier on the card that matches with another form of photo ID, and typically that would be the date of birth. Okay. So if someone got a vaccine card where the person who administered the vaccine never wrote their name or date of birth on that card, it's okay for the guest to write that in. If they're the one that received that vaccine, I would just encourage them to do that before they came to the terminal, so that their card has that information on it when they arrive. We've been through this a couple of times, and the guests tell us, well, they said we should just write our own name on the card. Well, then they should write their own name on the card. But for some reason, I think people just forget, or they thought it was on there and they just simply overlooked that. So I would encourage everyone to make sure their name has been written on the card and their date of birth. Then we want to be able to see what the vaccine manufacturer is, and that's usually written on the card, or it's stuck on through a label or through a stamp. And we want to make sure that all vaccine doses in that series were administered, and usually there's a lot number associated with the dose, but not always. That's not a must, but we prefer if there is a lot number. And then we want to see that the dates were actually written down, so that we can see when the last date was. Now, often we'll see a card without a date, or there's a sticker stuck over the date, or something's been wiped off the card for some reason. And so that's when we would ask the guest to provide additional evidence of their vaccine, so that we can literally see that that vaccine was in fact administered at least 14 days before the embarkation date. So please ask the guests to take a close look at their card and really take a look and see if these pieces of information are there, because in a panic in the terminal trying to access the internet on your phone, people struggle and it's a bit stressful. And of course, we will always help where we can with that. But it's better to try and get these little issues ironed out before arriving at the terminal. Absolutely. And then lastly, we want to see who administered the vaccine. There's just some credibility behind that. And when we start looking at looking for alternative evidence, or calling clinics, or helping the guest find that information, if we need additional information, it's just easier if we can see the clinic site or the name of the healthcare professional that gave the vaccine.
Okay, well, that's great. Now, Christoph was from Canada, and we are getting some questions from Canadian guests and their travel advisors, in the sense that in some cases, there's a little uncertainty about, can you mix vaccinations, and basically how do we satisfy the requirements? So can you talk a little bit about that, please?
Yes, so we need to always refer to the CDC's latest guidelines, and that does change very frequently. So I'd encourage you to always point the guest to the CDC's website about what vaccine combinations are acceptable. So today, the CDC, for a guest cruising on a ship in the United States, accepts anyone who arrives with a vaccine that's been authorized by the FDA or the WHO. And those basically, in short, then include, but are not limited to, and this is what we see most commonly, 2 doses of a Pfizer vaccine or 2 doses of a Moderna vaccine. And those are what we call mRNA vaccines. Some guests start with a single dose of AstraZeneca, and this is common amongst Canadians, where the second dose was not given, but instead a dose of Pfizer or Moderna, but typically Pfizer was given. And in those cases, the CDC does not yet recognize someone as being fully vaccinated if they only received 1 dose of the mRNA vaccines. For them to be considered fully vaccinated, again, on a ship sailing in US waters, they actually need to have received both doses. They don't consider somebody fully vaccinated if they receive just 1 dose of AstraZeneca plus 1 dose of either Pfizer or Moderna. Okay. So the WHO has approved AstraZeneca, and so 2 doses of AstraZeneca. And these vaccines have other names, by the way. So it's also important for the guests to be aware that maybe where they got their vaccine, it wasn't called the AstraZeneca vaccine. It was called Vaxzevria or something else. Guests that receive the Pfizer vaccine, the Pfizer vaccine and the Moderna vaccine also go by different names. And so we accept that vaccine that goes under any other name as well. And then lastly, of course, we all know Johnson & Johnson is accepted. Now, there are some vaccines that are authorized by the WHO, not yet the FDA, and those include Sinopharm and Sinovac. And so 2 doses of both those vaccines, again, 14 days before embarkation, those would also be accepted. Not that common because you wouldn't get that if you were in the United States, but some of our guests may have been in foreign countries where these vaccines were and still continue to be commonly administered.
Okay, that's great. By the way, I have no idea how you keep track of all this, but you're doing a great job. So thanks for sharing your insights. Let's move on. Now we've talked about vaccines. Let's talk about the testing requirements. And the question is, I've received the vaccine. Am I also required to have a pre-travel COVID-19 test performed 3 days prior to boarding? And so this is some recent news that's worth going through. So if we could cover that, that'd be great.
Yes. So the answer is short, is yes. We require all guests to produce a negative COVID-19 test that was taken within 3 days of their embarkation on all Princess sailings. And that includes guests that are fully vaccinated. The test can be a PCR or an antigen test. And as you'll see when we go to the next slide, but not yet, John, there are different types of PCR tests, and PCR tests are actually just one of many types of a category of tests that we'll accept. And we don't want to confuse people, but our guests do have questions about, well, do we accept this? And is this the same as a PCR test? And unfortunately, it's not quite that simple, but in short, we expect probably close to 100% of people will arrive with either a box standard PCR test or an antigen test. And that is for guests that are fully vaccinated, because we know today that we can see breakthrough infections in people that have been vaccinated with any one of those CDC authorized, or let me rather say FDA or WHO authorized vaccines. We see breakthrough infections. We see them in individuals that are fully vaccinated. We see them young and old. And those people that do get breakthrough infections, some of them know that they got infected because they have mild symptoms, but the majority of people don't know this unless they actually travel somewhere and need to have a travel test. So it wouldn't be completely uncommon for a guest to learn that way that they actually have picked up COVID somewhere, even though they were vaccinated. So this is playing out everywhere in the world, with the Delta variant being extremely contagious. And also infecting people that have been fully vaccinated. So for those reasons, we now require everyone that's embarking our ship to have a test within 3 days of boarding.
And then in terms of the proof and how we show that, and then kind of what that means when you get to the terminal, maybe we talk a little further about that.
Yes. So the guest needs to arrive with proof of a negative test. So that means that in the terminal building, they're going to take out not only their ID and their vaccine card, but they'll also present a negative test result. And that we'll go through how what's an acceptable test. But again, it needs to have the guest's name, first name and last name, and another identifier like the date of birth. And then we need to see on that test result the following: that it was either an antigen or PCR test, and that the result was negative. And then we want to look at the date of the test to make sure that it was done within 3 days of the embarkation date. And we want to see that it was actually done by a laboratory and not just a guest showing us something that they bought in CVS on the way to the terminal building and did themselves. It actually needs to be, and we'll go through this as well, a test that was either performed by a medical professional or medically observed. And so, the bottom line is that we can't accommodate anybody that arrives without a negative test result in the terminal.
Okay. The next question we threw up here talks about kind of the why. And I think you covered this in terms of the Delta variant and breakthroughs. And obviously, it's really important that we do everything we can to avoid any further spread. And clearly, we don't want this situation to get worse on our ships. I don't know if you need to give any more context to that. I feel like you covered it already, but
I think let me just speak to one thing there, John, and that is, why do I need to go to the trouble? So we're in the business of of keeping people safe, of course, and so we know that it's not only for your individual reassurance that you don't have COVID, but we want to make sure that everyone knows that everyone on board the ship has also tested negative, and so that gives everyone the reassurance that it's unlikely that we have embarked anyone with COVID, along with having been fully vaccinated by the time you embark and a negative test. The likelihood of someone coming on board with COVID is just so much reduced. And then the other thing is to just reassure everyone that, along with guests being tested, we do also frequently test crew on board. And so they are also subject to frequent screening tests. So knowing that the population on board that's fully vaccinated, 95% crew at least and 95% guests at least are fully vaccinated and frequently tested, with that, we believe we've got a safe cruising environment.
Okay, that's great. Now we're getting to kind of the nuts and bolts of what does this mean for me on my trip. So a good example here, I'm sailing on a Sunday. When do I need to get tested by? Is it Thursday? Is it Friday? Is it 3 days or is it 72 hours? So let's talk about the actual timing of this.
So I think you've got this in a little image, but basically the 3-day period starts 3 days before your cruise's departure date. And we didn't want to lock anybody into exactly 72 hours because when exactly, it's quite difficult to calculate hours backwards over 24-hour day periods. And by using a 3-day window, it doesn't really depend on the actual time that the test was taken, but rather the day that the test was taken.
Right. Okay. And then you mentioned a little chart, and I think we've done this so that you can see on the right is Sunday is when you're embarking. So then you kind of back into your left about when you need to get that test done. You could get it done on Sunday, same day, if you can get the results back that quickly. You could get it done on Saturday, you could get it on Friday, but Thursday is the earliest you could get it. You can't do it on Wednesday, but you could start it on Thursday.
That is correct. Yes, John.
Okay. So I think that's pretty clear. Now, the next question up, we're going to give a list because people are saying, well, what about my voyage? And so what's the earliest I can be tested for my specific cruise? Remembering we are focused on voyages through the end of October, we've created this little grid that shows you for every sailing what date. So as an example, I'm looking at my other screen because I can't see it on this one right now. But let's say October 14th is my sailing. I'm doing a 4-day cruise on Grand Princess. That means Monday, October 11th is the earliest day you can be tested. So I think that's pretty clear. I'll leave this up for just a second so you guys can take a screenshot of that if you want, or memorize it if you want. Whatever you're fast at doing, I will leave that there. So Linda is asking about crew. Will crew be tested before each sailing? You touched on this a little bit, Dr. Barneson, but maybe clarify the crew testing frequency.
Yeah, so the crew testing frequency is dependent on many different factors. And so the CDC tells us when to test crew, and then we do additional testing over and above what the CDC require of a fully vaccinated crew population.
Okay, great. We talk about the types of COVID tests. There's a couple out there. If you thought vaccines were confusing, testing can get a little bit more, but hopefully, as you say, the majority of people are going to land in a very similar spot. So if we could talk about the types of tests acceptable.
Okay, so as I mentioned, the types of tests that are acceptable for guests that are fully vaccinated, and I want to emphasize that this is for guests that are fully vaccinated, we give the guest the option of getting a viral test, which means they can get either an antigen test or a PCR test. Now, the PCR test falls into this group of tests we call NATs, and that stands for a nucleic acid amplification test. Don't need to remember that. Just be aware that a PCR test, as I said, is one of many different types of tests that we would also accept. Most commonly, and I think most easy to get and results can be processed pretty quickly, are antigen tests. And so typically they would be advertised or, I guess advertised or performed as a rapid antigen test, meaning you just get the result quickly. Mm-hmm. It's done quickly. There's no long period of time that passes, and usually it's done while you wait for the test results. That's the meaning of the word rapid. It doesn't mean lots and lots of tests are referred to as rapid tests, and an antigen test is just one test that can also be done rapidly. And so a rapid antigen test is absolutely fine. Sometimes an antigen test is also called a viral antigen test. That is, to me, it's a bit like saying I'm a human being. A antigen test does look at virus material. And so you might hear the word virus or viral antigen being used together. And then there are other long, complicated names for antigen tests, which if it's got the word antigen in it, it's an antigen test. Okay. Whether it says lateral flow, immunoassay, chromatographic, no matter what it is, if it's got the word antigen in, it is an antigen test and we'll accept it. But antigen tests are accepted only for fully vaccinated guests and not for unvaccinated guests. So guests that are not fully vaccinated or cannot get a vaccine for medical reasons, different rules apply to them, and they would only be allowed to get a PCR test. And so the different types of PCR tests, as I said, they fall in this group of tests under the heading of NAT, of which PCR is number one, and it's at the top. Now, sometimes there are little letters either in front or after the word PCR, but if it's got the word PCR in the name of the test, you're good. That guest has a test that we'll accept. There are other type of NATs or NAT tests, and they include things like, I'll just start from the bottom 5 bullets, a TMA test, a molecular test, an isothermal amplification tests. These are really just descriptions of the processes used to do PCR tests. But you might get inquiries from guests that say, can I get this type of test? And honestly, it's just a PCR test with a lot of other letters in the name. So any one of these tests are acceptable form of PCR test, and this is the test that we would need if a guest that's not fully vaccinated has an exemption to sail with us.
Great. And we're getting some questions in the chat about back-to-back cruises. We're going to cover that in a second, but I did want to interject real quickly that what we're sharing with you today, this is hosted by me, this is a Princess webinar, but these policies are applying across our corporation, correct? So this is a Holland America, Carnival, et cetera. So you know this better than I do, but just want to make sure it's clear that this is pretty standard now across our corporation.
Correct. Yes, and we see versions of this playing out in terms of when the test needs to be done. Certain health authorities in other parts of the world require the test to be done on the day of embarkation. And so on and so forth. So there are exceptions that apply in terms of when the test is done and specifically what type of tests are and are not acceptable. But yes, let's focus on what's applicable to our voyages within the United States, where as a company, this is our requirement. Any guest, whether they're vaccinated or not, needs to come to the terminal with proof that they were or have tested negative within the 3 days prior to embarking.
Right. And the question Connie's asking about going through tests at each port of call, I can say, having just been to Alaska, you're not tested when you're going ashore. You are, of course, asked to follow the local guidance in terms of mask wearing and any physical distancing, but it's not like you have to test every time you get on and off the ship. So that's nice. Don't have to worry about that. It's really just that pre-cruise, right?
Yeah, the only people that would need any kind of additional testing on board is if you were not fully vaccinated and the cruise is 7 days or more than 5 days, the CDC require us to do an antigen test on that guest before they disembark.
Okay. Then the question comes up about self-testing. You mentioned this a little bit earlier. What kind of test can you take if we're talking about a self-test?
Yeah, so John, as you can all see on the screen, only medically observed self-tests are acceptable. And basically what this means is a healthcare professional needs to observe you doing your test. So you cannot buy a kit and go home and do the test yourself and then just tell us that the result was negative. We need to make sure a healthcare professional has actually witnessed you taking the test, and there are two different ways in which that can happen. I think we have a slide for that, John, where you either call in to a telemedicine provider and they literally through televideo conferencing observe you taking the test, and they say, no, you got to stay in longer, you got to make bigger circles, other nostril. And so they kind of walk you through it and then observe you doing the test and then using the kit to get the result. And that results in a printout that is the same as what you would have got in a laboratory if a nurse or a healthcare provider in a laboratory took that test. Okay. So only medically observed tests are acceptable. You can, of course, also go in, and some places offer tests where the nurse is standing in front of you and observing you taking your own tests. And tests that we do on board where the CDC has approved for us to do this will also allow guests to take their own samples if our medical staff are observing them, if for any reason they need a test on board.
Okay. And I'm sorry, I hid the other slides because I thought we had, I thought I was doing this because we had technical problems with you, so I just wanted to move into it. So those slides are hidden.
That's fine.
You covered the point very well. Now let's give an example. Let's say a guest is flying into Seattle, right? And they're going to stay for a few days like I did before my trip. Where can they get a test? What would you say to that? And I'll show the answer here. I know I just want to get this out there, but I think it's good for you to talk it through.
Well, I think if you're flying into Seattle and staying there for a few days, you need to kind of plan when the best time is to take that test, because you might want to actually get the test even before you fly if it's going to be within the 3-hour interval. So you have that option. Or once you get to Seattle, plan to get the test done there. And typically airports generally today all offer tests, and they're all rapid antigen tests. So you have the test and you wait for the result. Doesn't take long at all. But there are other locations that also offer free testing, including places like Walgreens, Rite Aid, Walmart, and so on. So there are lists of testing locations that are published on, every health department's website. And I think there's a link down here, which is just one example of where testing locations are advertised.
Yeah. Okay. So that's a helpful website to go to, just kind of a broad referral. And I agree with you. Try and plan it out. If it works that you can test before you fly, great. But if you're going to be, in Seattle for a week before, then clearly you need to schedule that test before you embark the ship. And the same thing's coming up for cruises out of San Francisco, Los Angeles, Fort Lauderdale, all the places that we're going to be visiting through October. So please do check that out. Now let's move into masks, because there are some new policies on board, and just want to go into needing to wear a mask on board. And then maybe we could also cover the types of masks people should be wearing. So,
okay.
Yeah, do you want me to cover this? Because I think I can cover it.
I think so, yes. I mean, having, yeah.
Yeah, let me go through it. So in your stateroom, no. When you're in an elevator, you're in a public area, you're at the theater, you're in the dining room, we're expecting you to wear a mask in these locations. Now, when you go into a dining room, clearly you need to eat, you need to drink, and so when you're at the table and you sit down, then you can take the mask off. But when you're walking into the venue, and I have to say, I just came back from a conference in Las Vegas, and this is Vegas, people. It was the same rules. You wore a mask anywhere you were in the hotel until you sat down to have food. And so the same rules essentially apply here. And now the type of mask, my understanding is, bandanas, gaiters, those aren't acceptable. We're looking for a double layer or a medical grade mask, right? You can wear the face shield if you want, but that you can't do it on its own, correct? You need to have a mask, and if you want to add extra protection, I guess you can wear a face shield, but you can't do it on its own, correct?
Yes, correct. And I would just add to that, I mean, John, we want to always follow whatever the CDC is recommending to us and local guidance and look at, cases. And so, all of these rules, requirements and recommendations are subject to change. So it'll be clear on board where a mask is required or where a mask is recommended.
Yeah.
And so, without promising anyone anything that may have preferences about whether they do or don't themselves either want to wear a mask or expect people around them to wear masks, I think everybody just needs to know there's going to be changes to these procedures over the next weeks and months, and it's all again done with everybody's safety in mind.
Yeah.
So there'll be, as I said, signs on board the ship in those locations where masks are going to be required, and where there's just simply either recommended.
Yeah, I love Joyce's comment. We will get the test, we'll wear a mask, and we'd even wear a straitjacket if meant being on offensive cruise. That's very nice, Joyce. They tried to put me in a straitjacket. I wasn't sure what they were saying. I think they were confused. I also want to mention that our crew are wearing masks all the time. Like, we have, through this abundance of caution, even though they're vaccinated, we are making sure to do our part and to keep the crew as healthy and safe as possible, that they are wearing masks all the time. You'll never see a crew member on board not wearing a mask. Yeah, so I think that's important to note there. Okay, so I think that covers that. And now let's talk about, going back to testing for a second, what if someone tests positive? So they go into their local CVS 3 days before, they get tested, and what if they test positive? So then what happens there? So I'll show a bit of the answer here. But I think the answer is, we're asking you to stay home. Like, you're not going to be permitted to board. So if you test before you left the home, I wouldn't bother going on the flight, because that positive test is going to mean you are not allowed to board, right?
Correct. Yes. And so chances are, if you're taking a flight, you're going to need a test. But I would be reluctant to I would get the test as within that 3-day period, but do not travel to the terminal if your test was positive to discuss the test results, or only learn about your test result when you're at the terminal, because we cannot permit anybody to board who's had a positive test result. So that's quite an easy answer there, John.
And hopefully that doesn't happen. And obviously we hope everybody is okay and they can travel. But if it does happen, just note that as part of our Cruise with Confidence program, we are providing this coverage that if you have to cancel this your trip a couple days before or day before because you've tested positive, we will work with you. We'll make sure there's a future cruise credit given. There's a whole thing in the Q&A if you go online. We'll go through all the details about other expenses and what have you. But we will make sure that you're going to get that future cruise credit. So we want people making good decisions based on their health, not financial, right? So that's why we've done Cruise with Confidence, to give you that protection. Okay, now let's jump into the pre-submitted questions. Those were the ones that we just thought were the most pertinent going through the FAQ. But let's bring in some of the, before we do that, let me just remind you all of this website. If you go to princess.com/cruise health FAQ, you are going to see a ton of questions, and these are changing, as you say, as the guidance is being updated each day. We are going in and updating those, and to make sure that the most recent information. That's why we refer you to the website, because it's dynamic. It's updated as on the fly as the days go on. And so printing stuff and referring to a printed piece of paper is probably not the best thing to do right now. So that's why I would always go to that website. But if we want, we can bring in some of the pre-submitted questions and kind of go through those. So let's show them. Okay, so we covered this, but I think some of these questions we've already answered, but I think it's a good reminder. Are rapid testing results accepted?
Yes, but let me just speak about that for a few minutes. Just remember, many different tests can be done rapidly or can be done quickly. And so we need to be careful what kind of rapid test is the guest referring to, because a rapid antigen test is okay. A rapid PCR test, although they don't usually call them rapid PCR tests, but they may, that's also okay. But a rapid antibody test is not acceptable. And so when a guest says, can I do a rapid test? Just say, as long as it's a rapid antigen or PCR test, you're good.
All right, that's very good. Thank you for clarifying that. Okay, next up. Are masks required in outdoor areas such as the pool deck, jogging track, and the deck? So the answer there is no. That we're not requiring those. I would give you a funny sun tan lines, I should say. But no, we're not requiring that in the pool deck, jogging track, or the deck areas, which is nice. Can a passenger cancel without penalty for a refund if they don't like the new testing and masking rules? Yeah, so as part of Cruise with Confidence, we give coverage within that 30-day window right before your trip. And so this has been announced that whether you don't want to travel because of whatever the new policies are that you don't want to travel under, or you do test positive, we are giving you that coverage as part of Cruise with Confidence. Can you tell me about the COVID-19 coverage Princess is offering and if it applies to Canadians? COVID-19 coverage. So I think this relates to the policies we've just covered, right? There's nothing different. We're not segmenting. I think this is an important note. You mentioned it earlier, Doctor, that says the rules we're talking about here are for cruises sailing out of North America. That could be a US guest, a Canadian guest, a Brit, a European, wherever they're coming from, the rules apply. The rules that are operating out of the UK, Regal Princess is sailing, are different because they're under the guidance of the UK Health Ministry. So the rules there, I should say, are different necessarily than what we're going through here. So it's very clear you understand that what we've talked about here today relates to cruises out of North America for whoever sails on board.
Yeah, that may be a question related to, I don't know, insurance, but yes, I mean, if it's Princess Insurance, then yes. If it's been purchased by somebody, a Canadian, then yes, yeah. It would cover.
The Princess Vacation Protection. So speaking of which, the question is, do all passengers have to purchase travel insurance? So the answer to that is no, it's not a requirement. I would highly recommend that everyone travels with travel insurance. I mean, I'll be honest with you. A few years ago, I didn't often buy travel insurance. When me and my family went on a trip, I thought, what could happen? This trip, I took out travel insurance because I wanted to be protected. And I tell all my friends and family, if you're going on a trip right now without some sort of travel protection, I don't recommend that. That's all I'll say. I use different words for them, but for you all, I'll just say I don't recommend it. Now, what happens if a guest without insurance becomes ill, i.e. they test positive for COVID, maybe they show symptoms on board and they get a test and they show positive. How does that affect them?
So anybody that has symptoms of COVID, John, will be evaluated at no cost, and will also perform any required COVID testing at no cost. So I think the reason for having travel insurance, as you mentioned, is, COVID's not the only thing that is out there, even though I think some days to me it feels like that. But when ships leave on the voyages that they're leaving the United States. So whatever coverage you have, healthcare coverage you have, it doesn't apply when you leave on a ship, even if the ship's not going foreign. So if you've left on a voyage, consider yourself as leaving the United States, and medical expenses will be for your own account, of course, unless you have insurance, in which case the procedure is normally that you would pay and then make a claim with your insurance provider once you're home. And we have many team members that assist with that and take care of any guests that have medical issues on board, or even if they need to be landed in a port somewhere along the way.
And the good news is we enhanced our Princess Vacation Protection to provide greater coverage levels to include COVID issues, right, as part of the coverage. And so we're biased towards Princess Vacation Protection. You got 2 tiers of plans there you can take advantage of. So that would be our recommendation for sure. Okay. Do you have PCR testing available on board for all your ships for Canadians returning to Canada? If you do, can you please advise what the cost is?
Yeah, so we've got limited testing capabilities on board our ship. We generally reserve those testing capabilities for anybody with symptoms or who is identified as a close contact if somebody does test positive. So we can accommodate a small number of tests on board, but yes, I mean, if there is a need, I would suggest that the guest makes a booking early on in the voyage with the medical team to do that test, and just to be aware that it is limited. So yeah. If the teams on board are inundated with requests or for tests that are required, not simply just personal requests for tests, they're not going to be able to necessarily do those.
Right, and there are options obviously when you get to the airport, but obviously our team on board will do everything they can to make that happen. Does the testing requirement extend to sailings in December, i.e. Ruby Princess to Hawaii on December 7th? So my awareness of this, Doctor, is that we are doing this through the end of October, but we will see how this evolves into the future for November and December sailings. That's my understanding as of today.
Yeah, subject to so many things changing before that date. So we want to give some certainty about protocols that will apply in the sort of near short term. And we'll publish as soon as we can what we know would be different or the same as what's current today for those sailings.
Right. Okay. Any news on cruises 7 days or longer? Well, I think this has to do with the CDC's conditional sail order, which expires at the start of November. And so at the moment, we have voyages starting in November that are 10 days and longer. And so that's when those will begin. But between now and then, we are not offering any of the longer sailings. Is that correct? Did I have that right?
Yes, to my knowledge, yes.
Whew, got that one right. Good. Okay. How are cruise excursions affected? Well, I'll answer this one if I can. So having done several shore excursions, and gosh, they were so much fun. Amazing. We are abiding by the rules of the local ports we go into. And in Alaska, they asked everyone to wear a mask going ashore. We were wearing masks in the buses or shuttle, vans, whatever, taking to us to our place that we were at. But, once we were doing the zip lining or on the glacier, we were wearing masks. We wore masks in the helicopter, and then we were out on the glacier, we weren't wearing them. So same on the boat. We went whale watching. When you're inside the boat area, same for the ferry we took down to Haines, you wore a mask inside. When you're out on deck, you don't have to wear the mask. Some people did. Some people wore them all the time. It's really up to you at that point, but we just ask you to follow the local rules, and they will be communicated to you, so it's very clear when you're getting off the ship. But bring your mask. Don't leave them at home. Make sure they're the right kinds, and you should be all set. Does the cruiser need the original of the COVID-19 vaccination card, or can they carry a copy, maybe notarized, or have a copy on their phone? So I think you covered this, but I want to repeat the guidance.
Yeah, I should have actually maybe just talked about that for a while. So the original card is obviously preferred, and if the person has it, they must be asked to bring it. But some people have taken a photo of their card and then show it on their phone, or they print out that photograph. So we definitely prefer photos as opposed to photocopies. If somebody arrives with a photocopy, we're going to ask them to produce some additional evidence that they've been vaccinated. And that, as we said, can include any kind of digital version of the vaccine card, or a letter from the healthcare provider that either administered the vaccine or their own doctor that says, yes, this person did get a vaccine. Here's what they got. Here's when they had the vaccine. So yes, hopefully that answers the questions about copies or photos. But photographs are, we wouldn't encourage that. We definitely prefer to see the original card. But if the photo is all that's available, then yes, we would accept a photo if it fulfills all the other requirements.
I would take a picture, keep it in your phone, in your memo notes or whatever. I would bring the original, put it in your passport, and I would get my QR code from my state's. The more backup you have, I think, the better. Were there any other questions that we had, or that may? Oh, here, how are you? Oh, perfect. I was going to ask about back-to-back. How are you handling people doing back-to-back cruises in regards to the COVID-19 test? What happens to those folks who are doing back-to-backs?
So at this time, we're not requiring any additional testing if the person is staying on the same ship. And literally, the second cruise starts on the day that the first cruise finishes in the same port. So there's no additional testing requirements for that individual, of course, if they're fully vaccinated. If they're not fully vaccinated, then they should speak to the shipboard medical staff, because there will be additional testing requirements. And if those testing requirements with the shipboard medical staff can assist the guest with getting those tests done, because, of course, knowing that you're on board a ship, we should be able to accommodate a handful of tests that the CDC may need you to have. So for ships that are side by side, it's a different voyage completely. And so for those voyages, you would need another pre-embarkation test. And again, if there's a need for that test to happen, the first ship may be able to assist with that. So we haven't seen many of those cases. So again, we may be limited in what we can offer, but we'll certainly try our best to accommodate any testing requirements on board.
But there's no broad testing for people flying home. Once you finish your cruise, you don't have to be tested before you head home. So that's one thing I think it's good to clarify. And I want to bring back a point I'm seeing in the notes of somebody's asking a question about. I mentioned shore excursions and the rules of the tour provider. Just note, if you're fully vaccinated, if you want to explore Juneau, walk around Skagway, you're absolutely welcome to do that. We just ask that you adhere to the local rules in terms of mask wearing when you go into the shops and so forth. That's all we ask. But you're absolutely allowed to just wander around and explore the town. Absolutely. Okay, well, departures from Florida only have vaccinated guests on board. And clearly, we're all watching Florida. There's a bit of drama, I would say, going on down there. But I think we don't start Florida cruising into the Caribbean and Panama Canal until start of November. And we, again, through the end of this year, all of our cruising will be operating as fully vaccinated. So that affects any cruise out of Fort Lauderdale, which is in Florida. So yes, all vaccinated guests on board and crew. Okay, let's take a quick break. We'd like to do a survey, and I forgot to do it at the beginning, and I didn't want to interrupt the flow once we got halfway through it. So let's just do a survey. I think it's only for Facebook. You'll see it come into the feed. We'd love to know, what did you think of today's session? And please give good ratings, because if we give bad ratings, Dr. Barneson's never going to come back and do this with me again. She is extremely busy. Can't thank you enough for your time joining us here today and sharing your insights. We really, really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rosemarie. Yeah, you did a great job explaining it. And because I verified I didn't go to medical school, you put it in terms I can mostly understand. I'm a little slow, but really, yeah, I did not go to med school. Thank you. Thanks for reminding me. That's a producer again chiming in. So with that, I think we'll say thanks to Brenda, Dr. Barneson, for joining us. I want to remind you, let's go back to the slide real quick if we can, Joe. There is that site. Please bookmark that page, princess.com/cruise health FAQ, all the details. There's so many questions in there. I feel like giving out a prize. If you can go through, read, and get every answer of all the questions there, you've earned it, because there's a lot of information there. But what's great about it is that your client may ask you a specific question, you forget. Don't quote what you think. I would just go back to that site and say, let me get this for you clear, because that way you'll make sure it's the latest information, right? You're not having to memorize all this. That's what's going on. For some reason, I'm getting a message, the poll, the survey is not loading right now. So that is unfortunate. We'll see if we can't get it to work. But I did want to remind you that this is the week of webinars, folks. Tomorrow we're doing another webinar, but it's about a scintillating topic. We have almost 2,000 people registered. This is about refaring and fare comparisons using Polar Online. And the good news is, much like having Dr. Barneson here, I am clearly not the expert when it comes to medical issues, nor Polar. And so we're bringing back Selena and Dana. They are experts of Polar. They're going to help walk you through it. And this will make your life so easy. The more proficient you get with Polar, the more efficient you can be managing your business, servicing your clients. And you're very welcome. Thanks for that nice comment. That is greatly appreciated. If you're not already following me on Facebook, please do so. Go in, search for Princess VP Sales. You can follow all of my exploits there and all the updates we provide. Hopefully, for those that do follow me, you enjoyed my daily, sometimes twice daily updates from my trip to Alaska, and you get to hear all about that there. You can go back if you haven't seen it and just look at the history and look at all the posts, because I know you have nothing better to do. But I did want to say thank you for connecting with us once again. Dr. Barneson, thank you for your time. Really appreciate it. Any final words of wisdom, Dr. Barneson?
No, we're excited to have you back. I think we're well prepared. We have great medical teams on board. We've got testing capabilities. We've learned a lot about COVID over the last few months. Our ships are safe, and we look forward to seeing you get vaccinated and come and cruise with us. So get your guests to come and cruise with us.
I love it. Oh, I put you in the sales department. That was a perfect ending. Now, we did get the survey, the poll to work. Can we show the results, Joe? Can we do that real quick? 33% think they're a genius on this topic. 63% say they have a solid grasp on the topic. And only 4% just understand the basics. And 0% are, as we say, deer in the headlights, which means you know nothing. So that's really great that that's zero. And between genius and solid grasp to be in the 96% range, that's really great. So that shows the value of all the information you shared here today, Dr. Barneson. So thank you again. Thanks everybody for joining. We'll see you next time. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.